Hi everybody, TJ Mack of Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. I hope everybody's doing well. Well, this year I'm going to be reaching a milestone as I turn 50. Not going to share the date of my birthday because that's not what this video is about. But it's more so how lately I've even been more reflective than I normally am, and I'm a pretty reflective person. But of course, when you're hitting some of these milestones, it just really starts to get you to reflect a little bit more about things. And for me, I know, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past, that this will be my last full decade of work. I'm really gearing up towards retirement. I want to retire from my current job when I'm 62 years old. So my goal is to push pretty hard to ensure that I can live comfortably with my wife and do the things we want to do and have something to leave behind for our kids. My plan is not to work in retirement unless for some reason I want to do that, but I would hope that I can volunteer somewhere instead of work when that time comes. I know 12 years might sound like a long time away, but when you're talking about retirement planning, it really isn't. And it's, of course, something that we do much earlier in our life as well. Now, you might be wondering how collecting fits into all this. Well, my plan is to keep collecting well into retirement as long as I'm healthy and passionate about it. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. Now, the financial value of my collection, while of course it's important, it isn't at all factored into my retirement plan. My intent is to spend what I do now monthly on cards. Of course, that's going to be adjusted some for inflation. And before I do retire, there's one very big card that I want to add. And I'm not going to share that today, but it's a card that I've been mesmerized with since I was 6 years old. And it's just one that I want to add into my collection at some point. And it'll be more than I've ever spent on a card in my life. Now, as always, I've been doing this in the past. I'm going to continue to do this in the future. I think very carefully about the purchases I make and how I want my collection to evolve. Now, for baseball, there really aren't that many mid to upper tier Hall of Famers I still want to acquire between 1956 and 1989. I have them all pretty much of their base cards because that's what I've been collecting for much of my collecting time for the last 25 years. And really the only ones I need are the 67 Seaver, the 89 Topps Tiffany Griffey, and then a few Topps traded cards of Hall of Famers. And then if you count someone that should be in the Hall of Fame like Pete Rose, I don't have his rookie. Don't plan on getting the Seaver and Rose rookie. I do want to get the Topps Tiffany Griffey at some point. And I will pick up those Topps traded cards of Hall of Famers. There's really not that many of them, but just a few I want to add. Now, for baseball, instead of those types of cards, I'm going to start working on some of the lower tier stars and Hall of Famers. You can see here I'm showing off pickup not too long ago of a Dave Concepcion rookie from 1971 Topps. And I'm going to look at guys like Jim Cott and Burt Blyleven, Dick Allen, and players like that. That's going to be a focus area for baseball between 56 and 89. Now, for pre-1956 baseball, I'm being very selective. I have some of those cards, but I don't have a lot of the bigger cards, and it's not really where I'm at with my budget and where I want to be with my collecting. It's not really a big part of my daily budget, nor should it be. It's just a hobby. And I have really been focusing more on football and hockey in that era because the mid to upper tier Hall of Famers are far cheaper than their baseball equivalents. Now, just to look at, for example, I'll move ahead a little bit into the 1960s. Gordie Howe and Bobby Hull cards go for what I used to pay for Mickey Mantle 10, 15 years ago in the same condition. And I believe there's great value in those cards right now for those who like to collect them. No, it's not for everybody, but I enjoy hockey and football cards nearly as much as baseball. And you can also find early 50s cards like players like Otto Graham and Bobby Lane, who I have a Lane card here, and Y.A. Tittle, who's also shown here, and Sammy Baugh. These are some of the greatest quarterbacks of their time, and you can get them for a fraction of the cost of their baseball equivalents. Now, I already have the full 50s runs of those players, but for anyone who doesn't, they just offer a tremendous value right now, I think, if you're into football cards. Now I'm going to show you a couple recent pickups I made for a focus area that some of you are aware of. Now here are the 1949 Leaf cards, both second-year cards of Al Whitey Wistert and Steve Big Boy Van Buren. Now, Wistert is arguably the best player who is eligible but not elected to the Hall of Fame. He's even been a finalist in the past. And he was a 60-minute man, like many from that era. He played both offense and defense. On offense, he was a tackle and a guard. And on defense, he played interior of the defensive line. And he played from 1943 into 1951. He started out with a team called the Steagles, which was a combination of the Eagles and the Steelers. In 1943, they merged those teams together just because so many of the players were off to war that they had to combine rosters. So even though he was an Eagle, he played for the Steagles that year. And then later on, he returned just to being on the Eagles. Well, during his 9 seasons from 1943 to 1951, or it's actually 8 seasons, he was a 7-time first-team All-Pro. And that's actually his 9 seasons. And he was a 1-time second-team All-Pro. He also made the All-Decade team for the 1940s. Now, his number 70 was retired by the Eagles in 1952. Now, Wistert blocked for Van Buren, who was the first player to have back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and he retired as the NFL's all-time leading rusher. I love the nickname on here. He had a lot of different nicknames, but the one they used here was Big Boy. That just looks great on the front of that card. Now, the 49, Wistert, and Van Buren are the same images as the 48 Leaf. The difference is that the 48 look a little whiter on the front, and they're shinier looking, where the 49 just have a little bit of a duller appearance and a cream-colored border. And also, you'll see the difference on the backs. I'll show you. Now, on the left is a 48 Leaf of Pete Pihos, and it's got a cream-colored back, where you can see on the Van Buren, it's got a gray back. Now, some of the 48 Leafs, I believe the later series, have a gray-colored cardstock as well, so you'll see it on the back, but the earlier series used the cream color, where in 49, they're all the gray color. So there's just some slight differences between the 2 years. Also, the 48 Leaf had the college players in the set, where the 49 were only the NFL players. So it's not as large a set as the 48. Here you have 3 of the Eagles from those back-to-back championship teams of 1948 and 1949 together. And I do want to add Tommy Thompson, the quarterback, and of course Chuck Bednarik at some point, just to get those 5 great players from those teams into my collection. And just a wonderful looking group of cards here, and they're going to look great displayed when I put together a 40s case in my card room of baseball and football cards. I'm always on the lookout for sports magazines, and I recently came across this 1978 Sport magazine. It's a newsstand issue featuring, of course, Tom Seaver, and it's from the season right after the Midnight Massacre, when Seaver was traded from the Mets to the Reds. Now, that image of Seaver in his iconic throwing motion with his knee touching the ground, it's just etched in my mind. It's the first thing I think of when I think of Tom Seaver. Now, Seaver was traded on the final hours of June 15th, 1977 to the Reds, and it ended really weeks of speculation that year. And even in the previous season, they were talking about trading Seaver to the Dodgers for Don Sutton, which I didn't know until I read an article from the Baseball Hall of Fame. And at the time, obviously, it was a very unpopular trade for New York Mets fans. Seaver is a beloved figure in Mets history. He was their best player by far. At the time, he was 32 years old. He had already won 3 Cy Young Awards, and he was really widely acclaimed as the best pitcher of the game. And after the Reds got Seaver, they found themselves thinking about a three-peat because they had won the World Series in 75 and 76. And at that time, they were 7 games behind the Dodgers in the race for the National League West. And as we know, the Dodgers ended up winning the West that year, and they went to the World Series to face the Yankees. And they actually ended up winning the West with a 10-game lead over the Reds. Now, Seaver certainly did his part. He went 14-3 that year with a 2.34 ERA in his 20 starts. And he finished the season with 21 wins, 6 losses, and a 2.58 ERA. And he was third in the Cy Young voting. Now, Seaver would stay with the Reds through the 1982 season before returning to the Mets for 1 year in 1983. Then, of course, he went to the White Sox and then finishing his career with the Red Sox in 1987. A close-up view of my Tom Seaver cards with the Reds. You got the 78, 79, and 80 tops right here. Then here are the 81, 82, and 83 tops. I like that 83 tops because he's got that knee touching the ground, the same as on that 78 Sport Magazine. Very cool image. Now, as I think about the future, I want my collection to evolve into something that speaks to my personal philosophy of collecting. Slow, intentional, and reflective. I no longer feel compelled to keep expanding for the sake of expansion. Instead, I want to focus on acquiring pieces that fill gaps in my understanding of the rich history of the sports that I enjoy collecting. As you can see here, hockey, football, and baseball. And whether it's cards from overlooked players, teams from forgotten seasons, or even those niche memorabilia pieces, each new edition is going to be made with a purpose. And that's really just the story behind how I've approached this hobby, and it's done me very well. And it ultimately comes down to is that collecting, it just brings me peace. It's a source of quiet joy, and I'm just really not interested. And it just seems like there's so much of it on YouTube, at least in the channels I see sometimes, of people that there's just the drama and the self-importance. And there's a short I see on YouTube that pops up from time to time, and I think it's in an AI generated voice, but it talks about how within 3 generations after your death, you're going to be forgotten. And this is not meant to be a somber message, but rather it just gives us perspective on what really matters. And as much as a hobby of collecting cards go, I can look at cards like this 1980 Topps Gilbert Perreault, or the 79 Topps Preston Pearson, or this 88 Topps Don Mattingly, and I just get a flood of memories that come back to me. And in that simplicity of just collecting and just seeing those cards on my wall, I find hobby fulfillment. That's all I have this week. Until we talk again soon.